Welcome to our Cybersafe Digest weekly podcast, episode 11. Each week, we will unfold the most recent cyber attacks and will provide you with valuable insights on how to shield your business from these threats, along with practical steps and tips to enhance your cybersecurity.
Hello everybody, I'm Martin Roberts, Managing Director of New Ways. Welcome to our Cybersafe podcast, our companion piece to our weekly email and update. And I'm here with
Toby Stevenson, Chief Technology Officer here at New Ways.
I thought, Toby, it would be good to go back to basics, but not in a bad way, but in a good way, and talk about patching. It's a ignored, misunderstood thing that happens, by somebody else does it, but it's really critical.
Yeah, it's a really crucial part of the arsenal with which an organisation defends itself, or an organisation or an individual defends itself against cyber attacks. And you're right, patching is often overlooked or doesn't really get the attention that it deserves, given how critical it really can be. We all know about Windows updates and Microsoft Patch Tuesday, and people think we're doing great stuff around those things, but there's a whole raft of other software that also needs to be updated, which often isn't considered in the same way.
Yeah, I would. Let's just unpack those couple of things in that one there, which is Microsoft Patch Tuesday, or the big patch updates and such like. Because a lot of people actually don't recognise what's happening in the background on the systems.
Fine, yeah, so Microsoft probably for 2 decades now have released their patches on the second Tuesday of the month, which has been affectionately termed Patch Tuesday. The idea being that it gives everyone a level playing field. They all know when the patches are coming out so they can plan their lives around it. It happens to be the second Tuesday, so it hopefully avoids things like month end that are important to businesses. Yeah, sure. And essentially all of the Windows servers, desktops, the patches for all those things all come out on that Tuesday. They all get saved up. So before that, patching was kind of a bit scattergun. Yeah. When a patch was ready, it was released, and it was difficult for people to understand what was going on. Now we have a greater understanding of when the patches are coming out and what the days following Patch Tuesday are going to look like. Often organisations will have different update rings, so they don't update everybody at the same time, just in case there's a problem with a patch. And it covers off things such as Windows updates, so updates to the Windows operating system, normally things like security definition updates, and all those good things that help keep the bad guys out. Microsoft do a good job of keeping the contents secret until they release, so that it reduces the opportunity for a bad guy or girl to exploit a vulnerability that's about to be patched. But one thing that we should recognise is that the moment that Patch Tuesday drops is the bad guys and girls are out there looking at what those patches are fixing and working out how they can beat the end user or the organisation to patching.
So if they're rolling it out later, or they're doing putting patches out there in a scheme, that means that they do them all at once. I guess it's probably fair to say, isn't it, that, as you said earlier on, they've been doing it now for a couple of decades, and they're getting reasonably good at it now.
Yeah, back in the early days, patching, you kind of took your life in your hands with it a little bit. And, I can remember early on in my career, you would always make sure you had a strong backup before you did any patching, and often servers or desktop machines will break with quite a regular occurrence. That's much less of a thing now. The QA processes that they go through are clearly much better. Doesn't mean they don't sometimes make mistakes, which is why organisations will often delay or have multiple update rings just to see if there's any obvious gotchas there. Yeah. But on the whole, they do a good job, and it's often better to patch as quick as you can, particularly on desktop operating systems.
So we know that Microsoft have a well-practiced, experienced way of putting out the patches and such like. And of course, it's the people who deploy the patches ultimately in the IT departments, in the MSPs and such like, who can control that, well or badly as the case may be. So think about non-Microsoft patching. That's always been an area for us that has been more challenging.
Yeah, exactly. Microsoft patching is relatively straightforward because most people use Windows 10, Windows 11 or Windows Server, and the breadth of products within that update suite is relatively small.
Sure.
When we start looking outside of that, we go from any bit of software from A to Z.
Yeah.
And how do you build a patching solution that covers every single bit of software that's ever been released? And it's really, really difficult.
And that's the challenge we find when we take over a new customer or we're doing an audit. We can find, hey, the Microsoft estate is patched really well. It's again well practiced because of all that history. But then we can find some pretty horrible stuff in the rest of the estate.
Yeah, especially if that software doesn't have its own updating mechanism in it.
Yes.
So we know that Windows itself has its own update mechanism. Yeah. If you have got a managed IT department or a managed service provider, they can often commandeer that update process and make it run to certain schedules, and then can pull reports out on that to validate that the patching is occurring. Web browsers, again, a really common piece of software that is used by bad guys to exploit a system, gets updated very frequently, and it has its own update mechanism, and invariably that happens outside of the patch Tuesday. Even the Microsoft browsers, they're updated when there is a thing to be fixed. They push it out there. But you may see this, you kind of first of all get like a little green arrow saying there's an update, and it's kind of whispering at you, there's an update, and it gets to like an orange one, talking a little bit louder, then it's shouting red at you, there's an update, you've got to restart. So that's what the managed patching will help. It will help make sure and enforce those patchings. But there is an update mechanism, so as long as you are relatively alert, you can click the button, restart the browser, and the vulnerabilities will disappear. It's important to note that most patches aren't effective until you've restarted the program they relate to. So in the case of a Windows update, you have to restart Windows most of the time. And in the case of browsers or other applications, you don't have to restart them so they can pick up the updated files.
And I suppose one of the good practice things there is occasionally, or more than occasionally, is to reboot your machine.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's a really obvious thing, and actually it's a little bit harder than it ever used to be, because sometimes when you restart or shut down, that doesn't actually restart or shut down the machine. It kind of just puts it into like a long-term sleep, and you don't get the benefit of that full restart. But yeah, I mean, I like to say if you can restart your PC every week, it makes a lot of sense.
Yes, I mean, the problem is it's a bit of a pain, isn't it, in that, because you get into this lovely place where you get all your windows in exactly the right place.
Yeah, exactly. You've got 75 tabs open in your browser with all the things you're doing, and Excel and Word and PowerPoint and Outlook's open and Teams is open and this and that and the other. And you reboot and you start from scratch again. Yeah,
it can take you what feels like a week just to get the same look and feel to your desktop.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess for companies who've got their own IT departments or use an MSP like us, patching is either automatic or managed for them. So if you're a smaller business which doesn't have its own dedicated IT resource, and you rely on each other or just general use of your computer, what are the signs to look out for to make sure that should you get into a routine where you think at least once a month, hey, I just need to make sure it's patched, and where would you look and what would you do?
Yeah, so again, Windows does a really good job of telling you that it's patched or has got patches waiting and they need a reboot. It's got a lot better at that in recent years. That said, I think it does make sense, particularly within a week, so maybe the tail end of the month, just check to see if there are any patches or updates that are available, because as with everything, if you don't see it, you forget about it. And actually, if you have a problem on your machine and it's not getting Windows updates, for example, it could be 2 or 3 months before you recognise that's the case. And that's the advantage of having a managed solution, because it can highlight those things. But on a Windows machine, quite simply, you click on the Start button, you can just type Windows Update, and it will pop up in the search, and you can click in there and it'll show you when it last checked, if there's any patches or updates that are required, and there's little buttons to say, update it now or reboot now. So you've got options there. Similarly, within the browsers, it's normally help and then about, and then it normally has a little spinny wheel, and it tells you, checking the version of Edge or Chrome or Firefox, and then it will normally give you an opportunity to run the update there and then if necessary. Other bits of software are harder.
Yes.
Because it depends is the answer. Some software has an automatic update mechanism. So software such as FileZilla, which is an FTP client,
Yep.
when you start it, it checks if there's any updates every time you start it.
Yep.
So that will tell you when you start the program, and it's either help and about or help and update, depends on the version, but it's quite front and centre on that particular piece of software. Other bits of software, less so. And I think probably the bit of advice around that is organisations need to inventory what software they've got deployed so they can understand whether their patching solution covers the scope of the software they've got in place.
Absolutely. Okay, so patching is actually done for two major reasons. One is actually updating the software, because it may have to address changes in hardware, other software and such like. But mainly it's about security.
Yeah, security is the big one, particularly in the modern era, with most applications having some touch to the internet. There are vectors that can be exploited. Things like Adobe is a common one. So Adobe Reader, Adobe Acrobat Reader is a common one outside of the browsers. Perhaps less so these days, but Java always used to be one as well. Yeah. So patching solutions often have mechanisms for dealing with these. Later versions of these tools also have automatic updating. But again, if you're not keeping an eye on it, you don't know if it's got a problem, if you haven't got much disk space, or you've not been online when it wants to run its update checks because it's not continually doing it, then it's quite easy to fall behind. And certainly in the case of PDF readers, weaponized PDFs are a common thing, and if they can bypass the initial email defenses, they will try to exploit a vulnerability in the reader to take some malicious action on the machine.
Okay, so patching is on the face of it quite mundane, but actually if you're not aware of it, potentially actively taking steps to make sure that patching happens or is not held up by any other activity, it can be dangerous. We've seen some activities, some cyber attacks, which have been there because things weren't patched.
Yeah.
Or they've got in there before the patches were deployed. Because actually, as we've just said, as you said earlier on, is that the release of those patches actually will highlight that there was a vulnerability which is going to be patched. If you can get to a machine before that patch is applied. Exactly.
And some of the most recent prolific ones have leveraged the fact that these are software tools used by large organisations that cannot just restart things at the drop of a hat. So a lot of remote access tools have recently been in the news around having vulnerabilities. So different VPN solutions. We're talking enterprise level stuff. So it makes it very difficult for that organisation to suddenly turn things off and restart them once they got the patches. But the bad guys know who is using what bits of, particularly in the big enterprise and government institutes. So they will use these vulnerabilities when they're announced to target those organisations. And one of them is so bad, in fact, that you can actually get onto the network without any credentials.
How wonderful. Yeah, what an achievement that is.
A secure VPN solution that lets you on without any credentials if you exploit it in a certain way.
It makes it easier, but none of that security nonsense to get through.
Exactly.
So I've been reading this week a couple of things. In June last year, Reddit was targeted by the Black Cat ransomware gang, and that was to do with beating a patch, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, Reddit's not immune to these kinds of things.
Yeah.
I mean, they've been done before by using substandard MFA. They're a big target for it. The attackers were particularly disgruntled around the potential change that Reddit were going to make to its pricing model. So this is a form of hacktivism. They're basically stomping all over them to say, don't do this, it's not a good idea.
So they asked for $4.5 million, but they also said, please don't introduce this new pricing model. I'm down to Sainsbury's and to see if I can get the price of crisps reduced in much the same way very soon, I'm sure. And then our friends at T-Mobile, they keep appearing on our screens as a...
Yeah, I mean, T-Mobile's not really an outfit that we see very much in the UK anymore. I think they're still reasonably strong in Europe, and they have a big presence in the US. T-Mobile, like a lot of the mobile carriers, suffer from having a lot of legacy infrastructure.
Yes.
And it's complicated and convoluted, and it's hard to find all the stuff that needs to be patched, and that's what the bad guys, they thrive on that.
Yeah.
These difficult to manage legacy environments. So yeah, and of course, T-Mobile being full of consumer data, who the customers are, the payment details, they're an absolute prime target.
Where they live, yeah, absolutely. So I think, thinking about patching generally, what are the takeaways? You got to patch. Microsoft does a good job for you. Don't ignore.
No.
I know it's tempting to say, well, I can do that tomorrow, or I can do that tomorrow, and wait for the indicator to go red. The best advice is do it now.
Yeah, it's annoying to have to restart all those browser tabs and log back in everywhere, but it really is the best advice to give.
And then look across the software you use. If it's a relatively common one, again, it will be patched regularly. It may even be patched in the background. You might not even realise it's happening. But if you're using something slightly more esoteric, or something that, a good old trusted piece of software, which I occasionally use a piece of software which I know is 20 years old because it does something very, very special. Mm-hmm. Has it been patched recently? I suspect not.
Oh, I've got my fingers in my ears now.
at home. Not for my work.
Okay.
Not for one moment would I dream of doing that. And one of my good practices, as much as they are, is actually have a completely separate home kit, which is not connected.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. But certainly, if check through your inventory. If you've got something which is older, which isn't, check if it is patched these days. Check it's still valid. And be sure, don't put yourself at risk for the sake of something as mundane as patching. It's a good thing. It's a pain. It's always at the wrong time, but you've got to get it done, and it makes sense. And if you're not sure about it and you use an MSP, you use a third party to help with your IT, check out that they're doing the right stuff for you.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. And I think final note on patching is, particularly from a Microsoft perspective, they're great at patching, but they'll only patch the things that are currently in support. So if you've got out-of-date operating systems, out-of-date software, they will not be patched. Microsoft have a very good lifecycle policy. It's normally 10 years, give or take.
Yeah, sure.
So normally the asset has been well used and exercised.
Yeah, pay for itself.
Absolutely. So particularly operating systems, when they go end of support, the very first round of patches after that is when a lot of those newly out-of-date systems will be targeted. The threat actors, the bad guys and girls out there, they'll be storing up known vulnerabilities waiting for them to not be patched. They'll also look at seeing what the unsupported versions of Windows have had patched and work on the basis that the unsupported haven't, so they can backtrack it from there.
Of course you would, yeah, makes sense.
Because Windows is mostly an evolution of the previous version.
Okay, so patching, do it. If you don't do patching yourself, make sure somebody else is doing it for you. Thank you very much, folks, for listening to this week's Cybersafe Digest. Thank you, Toby, very much for those insights and that information. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. We've reached the end of episode 11 of our Cybersafe Digest weekly podcast. Thank you very much for listening, and to make sure you don't miss out on our future episodes, hit that subscribe button on Spotify, Apple or Google Podcast. For more cybersecurity wisdom and resources, head over to our website at cybersafe.co.uk. See you next Thursday.